What would you do if the two people you trusted most, your own brother and the woman he claimed to love, built the perfect lie just to rob you blind? They didn't just want my money. They wanted my loyalty, my silence, my soul. And for months I gave it to them. I believed their government seals, their fake meetings, their polished smiles. But the moment I spotted a single typo, just one missing letter, everything unraveled. I'm Michael Rayner, and this is how I turned the perfect con back on the con artists who built it. I used to believe life would settle into a calm rhythm once you passed a certain age. At 39, I had my routines down to a science. Wake up before dawn, take my coffee, black drive 25 minutes to Langton Engineering in Alexandria. Handle my structural analysis reports and head home by 6. That was it. I didn't chase chaos. I didn't invite drama. My world was steady, predictable, and for a long time I thought that was enough. Then Daniel called. I hadn't heard from my younger brother in months. That wasn't unusual. Daniel was always floating somewhere in between get-rich schemes and personal disasters. I'd helped him more times than I could count, paid off a DUI fine when he was 23, covered 3 months of his rent, when he got fired from that real estate gig in Houston, and once even wired him $5,000 on Christmas Eve just so he wouldn't have to sleep in his car. So when his name flashed across my screen one Thursday evening, I hesitated. I already felt the weight in my stomach, but I picked up. His voice was energized, manic, almost like a man who'd just won the lottery. "Mikey, you're not gonna believe this. I've got something huge. I'm serious this time." I kept my voice even. "What's going on?" He launched into it. Said he'd met someone, Jessica Hale. Smart, connected, brilliant. He described her like she was some kind of DC insider, someone who worked closely with infrastructure contracts tied to federal grants. He said they'd been dating for a few months, that she had an opportunity, and he'd thought of me immediately. "You've always been the brains in the family, Mikey. This is the kind of thing you could retire on." I leaned back in my chair, letting his words settle. Retire on. I'd heard that line from him before in different forms. Multi-level marketing pitches, failed crypto investments, fake consulting gigs. But this felt different. He was speaking with such certainty, like he truly believed it. "What's the opportunity?" I asked, half out of curiosity, half out of obligation. "So there's this project," he said. "Infrastructure renewal. Federal funding. Big contracts. Jessica's got the inside scoop. They're looking for quiet investors, people who won't rock the boat, who'll let the process play out. She's got access. I'm telling you, Mikey, this could be massive." I could hear traffic in the background. Daniel was always pacing when he talked. He did that when he was pitching, like he was on a stage performing. "You trust her?" I asked. "Man, more than I've ever trusted anyone," he said. "She's different. She's not in it for herself. She's sharp, Mikey. You'll see. Just meet her. Have lunch with us." One lunch. That's all I'm asking. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't say no. I rarely ever told Daniel no outright. Something in me always wanted to believe he'd finally figured it out, that one day he'd call with news that wasn't another disaster waiting to happen. The following Saturday, I drove down to Arlington to meet them. Jessica was polished. That's the word that comes to mind. Tailored blazer, subtle makeup, a confident handshake that didn't waver. She introduced herself like a consultant, someone used to dealing with men in suits. During lunch, she spoke about funding cycles, bid structures, and the language of procurement officers like she'd lived it for years. "We've been identifying key players for a new corridor upgrade," she said between bites of her salad. "Think highways, logistics routes, east to west expansion. Quiet money gets in early. The federal side stays clean, you stay quiet. Simple." I nodded slowly, absorbing her cadence more than her words. She spoke like someone used to closing rooms, someone who didn't beg for trust but demanded it by default. Daniel barely talked. He just watched me, a glimmer of pride in his eyes, like he was finally showing me something valuable. After lunch, he pulled me aside. "What do you think?" he asked. "She's convincing," I said, "because it's real, Mikey. I wouldn't waste your time otherwise." I wanted to believe him. I spent the rest of the weekend reviewing the paperwork he sent me. It looked legitimate. Federal SEALs language I recognized from public project files I'd worked on. A proposal to invest in phases, 4 rounds of contribution. A clear equity breakdown on profits. Part of me itched at the professionalism of it all. This wasn't Daniel's usual scattershot mess. There was structure. There was planning. And Jessica's presence made it feel even more real. By Monday, I'd wired the first $50,000. It felt strange. Not reckless, not quite comfortable either. But Daniel had promised it would move fast, and for once I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The following week moved faster than I expected. Daniel kept in touch almost daily, sending me snippets of reports, timelines, and mock projections. I didn't understand half of the jargon, but Jessica's name was on every attachment. It gave everything a sense of legitimacy, or maybe I just wanted it to. She called me personally a few days later, said she appreciated my confidence in them. Her voice over the phone was smooth, deliberate, like someone who had learned how to control a conversation without sounding like she was trying to. She invited me to lunch again, this time just the two of us. Said she wanted to answer any lingering questions I might have and walk me through the next phase of the investment. We met at a French place tucked away in a quiet block of Arlington. It was the kind of restaurant you'd walk past without noticing unless someone had told you to go there. She arrived right on time, dressed in a charcoal gray pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like she belonged in a boardroom, not in my brother's chaotic orbit. I stood as she approached, and she extended her hand. "Michael, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming." She ordered a glass of wine. I stuck to water. As the waiter stepped away, she pulled a tablet from her leather bag and placed it neatly between us. "Let's talk about where we are," she said. She walked me through a series of slides. Infrastructure renewal in West Texas. A proposed logistics corridor connecting Midland to Fort Stockton. Budget projections. Contract timelines. She spoke about back-channel communications with mid-level federal contacts. Her language was confident, her timing exact. She answered my questions before I even asked them. I found myself nodding along. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. She had the rhythm of someone who lived in a world of projects, deadlines, and regulatory compliance. There were no hesitations, no filler, just facts. At least they sounded like facts. The goal, she explained, was to raise silent capital in 4 stages. Each contribution would unlock further access to the contracting process. She emphasized that discretion was paramount. Too many names involved and the whole thing could be compromised. She used phrases like early investor placement and soft allocation margin. It was the language of exclusivity. And I had always been on the outside of those kinds of circles. The thought of being on the inside even once was tempting. Jessica leaned in slightly. "Daniel told me you've been his anchor for years. He speaks very highly of you. This is a chance for him to finally stand on his own and for you to benefit from it." I didn't respond right away. Her words were carefully chosen. I could tell. She smiled faintly, sat back, and tapped her nails against the tablet. "You don't have to decide now, but if you're in, we'd like to close phase 2 by next Friday." The check came and she paid without hesitation. As we stepped out into the sunlight, she turned to me. Whatever you choose, Michael, thank you for believing in him. He really does want to do this right. I watched her walk toward her car, a black sedan spotless with government plates. Or what looked like them. I'm still not sure. On the drive home, my mind spun in circles. Part of me kept thinking it was too clean, too smooth, but the other part, the part that had always tried to see Daniel as more than his failures, wanted this to be real. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, reopened the files she'd sent me and looked at them again. There was something comforting about the formatting, the acronyms, the footnotes. Everything mirrored what I'd seen in my own engineering projects over the years. That night, Daniel called again, so he asked, barely waiting for me to say hello. I hesitated. "She's good," I said. "She's the real deal, Mikey. I wouldn't put you into something that wasn't solid. Not this time." There was a quiet moment on the line. I imagined him pacing again, always moving. "I'll do the second round," I said finally. He let out a breath. "You won't regret it." We set up the wire transfer that weekend, another $70,000. Jessica sent me a confirmation email time-stamped and signed with another set of documents attached. Investment receipts, projected returns, future deadlines. And just like that, I was in deeper than I'd ever been. The third payment came easier than the second. I barely blinked as I wired another $20,000. At that point, it felt like momentum, like walking downhill. You pick up speed without noticing, and suddenly it takes more energy to stop than to just keep going. Jessica emailed every 2 weeks with updates. Progress reports, contract drafts, revised timelines. The files were always clean, properly formatted, sometimes with what looked like federal headers and watermarks. She started copying a man named Gerald Simmons on the threads, supposedly a federal liaison. His replies were brief but professional. A government email address. No typos, no red flags. Daniel was more confident than I'd ever seen him. He spoke like someone who had already made it. Said things like, "When this goes through and once the first payouts start." He asked if I had considered putting more in before round 4 closed. I told him I'd think about it, and I meant it. By the third month, I'd sent a total of $140,000. It was more than I'd ever invested in anything, including my own house. But the more I paid, the harder it became to back out. It felt like riding a roller coaster and refusing to look down. Then came the message from Emily. It was a Saturday night and I was bored. I had scrolled too far back on Facebook, digging through old pictures and posts I hadn't seen in years. I don't even remember what I clicked on. Maybe it was an old photo from a friend's wedding. Jessica was in the background, not the focus, just a face in the crowd. A comment popped up underneath. "That girl's trouble, trust me." The name caught my eye. Emily Parker, my ex from college. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. The breakup was clean, nothing dramatic. Life had just pulled us in different directions. I clicked on her profile and hesitated before typing. "Didn't expect to see your name here. You know her?" The reply came in minutes. "Jessica Hale, yeah. She dated my friend Carrie's brother a couple years back." Why, I paused. My pulse quickened. I typed slowly. "She's dating my brother now. They're doing some kind of investment thing together." Long story. There was a pause. Then 3 dots appeared. "Oh God. Mike, be careful. She's really good at what she does." "What do you mean she's not stupid? She makes herself look legit. Real papers, real people." Carrie's brother lost almost 50 grand before they figured it out. By then, she'd ghosted, changed her number, disappeared. My chest tightened. "Are you sure it's the same person?" "Positive. That voice, that fake laugh, the government connections. She even used the same name." I stared at the screen for a long time. Everything around me faded. The noise of the TV, the hum of the fridge, the dog barking outside. It all went quiet. I typed again. Did they go to the police? Tried. Nothing stuck. No paper trail. Nothing under her name. No proof she took the money. I leaned back, heart racing. I pulled up the emails, read them again, looked at the headers, scanned for inconsistencies, but they were all clean. Everything looked perfect. That was the problem. I tried to sleep that night, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's smile at that lunch. The way she slid the tablet across the table, the calm in her voice, the calculated pauses. She had known exactly what she was doing. By morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was off. I called Daniel around noon. He didn't pick up. I waited an hour and called again. Still nothing. Finally, he sent a text. "Hey, in meetings all day with Jess. Everything okay?" I stared at the message. Meetings on a Sunday. "Yeah," I replied. "Just wanted to check in." He didn't respond. That afternoon, I opened every email again, scanned the headers, copied one of Gerald's addresses, and ran it through a domain lookup site. It looked federal. But the registration was private. That wasn't normal. I saved every file to an external drive, printed out the contracts, highlighted the seals, the headers, the language that looked too perfect. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to find something. My hands trembled as I stared at the growing stack of paper on my dining table. My gut twisted. Everything I had worked for, everything I had saved might be sitting in someone else's pocket, and they hadn't even broken a sweat taking it. I looked at my phone again. No new messages from Daniel. I spent that entire night walking circles in my living room, watching the clock crawl toward morning. Every hour that passed without hearing from Daniel only made my chest tighten more. I wasn't even sure what I was hoping to hear. A confession, maybe, or some ridiculous excuse that I could poke holes in until I convinced myself none of this was real. By 9 a.m., I gave in and called him again, straight to voicemail. I sent another text, just checking in. Let me know if everything's still on track. Nothing. When his name finally lit up my screen that evening, I picked up on the first ring. "Mike, sorry," he said, voice overly casual. "Been slammed all day. Jess and I have been running meetings non-stop." That same pit in my stomach deepened. Meetings with who? Government guys mostly? Jessica's been in contact with 2 procurement leads. They're pushing phase 4 hard. We're almost out of time, man. You're still in, right? What do you mean out of time? The shortlist. Jess says the investment window's closing Friday. If we don't finalize our slot by then, we lose priority status. Means waiting a year or more for the next round. No guarantees. He paused, letting the implications sink in. I waited, hoping he'd say something that sounded like it came from my brother and not a sales script. "They're doing a video call Thursday," he continued. "Final briefing. Jessica says you should be on it. Gerald's presenting, and there's another guy from the DOT. Gerald, the name again. That phantom authority figure I'd never actually seen." "You'll get answers," Daniel said. "Trust me." He texted me the link the next morning, complete with a code and password. The meeting was labeled as Private Infrastructure Briefing. The invitation looked professional, branded with what appeared to be a Department of Transportation logo at the bottom. I opened it 5 minutes early just to be sure. The screen lit up at exactly 3 p.m. Jessica appeared first, her camera steady and background blurred. She smiled and thanked everyone for attending. Next came Gerald Simmons, the supposed federal contact. His face was thin, glasses perched perfectly, voice calm. He spoke in clipped sentences, always referencing federal protocols, partnerships, timeline language. Then came the final guest, Charles Grant. He was introduced as a regional liaison out of Texas. Graying hair, expensive suit, polite smile. He spoke slowly as though choosing every word to sound both urgent and official. "We're looking to close the Tier 1 group by end of week," he said. "This round is designed for low-noise stakeholders with strong equity contribution records. Discretion is non-negotiable." I muted my mic and sat back watching his every movement. Something felt wrong, not in what he said, in how he said it. There was a flatness to it, like he was reading from a script. His hand gestures were stiff. His smile never quite reached his eyes. And then there was the moment where his camera briefly glitched and I caught a flash of another background behind him. One that looked nothing like a government office. Jessica wrapped things up, thanking everyone for their trust and their patience. She promised follow-up emails, documentation, payout estimations. Gerald gave a final nod and the call ended. Daniel called 10 minutes later. "Well," he asked. I waited a second before answering. "It looked fine," I said. "Looked fine, it's gold, Mike. You saw it yourself. We're inside the room." He was hyped, too hyped, like someone riding a sugar high. I could hear Jessica laughing in the background like they were already celebrating. "This is the big one, man. I'm putting everything I've got into the final round. Jess says this closes the loop. After that, we're just waiting for disbursement." I didn't answer. "I get it," Daniel said, his tone softening. "You're nervous, but look at it logically. You're already in deep. We both are. If you pull out now, all you're doing is losing everything you've put in. No safety net, no refund, and worst-case scenario, you stay in and make a fortune." There was something so calculated about his logic and yet so familiar. "The worst case is you win," he'd said. As if losing more wouldn't matter. I told him I'd think about it. That night I reopened every email, every file, every spreadsheet. I printed them all out and laid them across my dining table, cross-checking language, formatting logos. I zoomed in on Gerald's signature, scanned Charles Grant's frame from the video call. I couldn't find anything obviously fake, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that it was too perfect. By the next morning I was pacing again. If I walked away now, I'd lose $140,000. If I stayed and it was a scam, I'd lose more. But part of me wanted closure, wanted proof. I convinced myself that it was the only way to know. That afternoon, I transferred $90,000 to the same account. Jessica emailed a receipt within minutes. "You are now fully positioned within Tier 1 allocation. Final documentation to follow. Thank you for your continued trust." The words felt cold, scripted, empty. I sat in my quiet house staring at the screen. There was no joy, no relief. Just a sinking feeling like I had just thrown the last rope into a well and jumped in after it, hoping I'd find something to hold on to before hitting the bottom. The next morning, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it. I stared at the printed documents from the last email Jessica had sent. Something about it kept nagging at me like a pebble in my shoe I couldn't shake out. I picked up the page again and scanned through the signature block. My eyes locked onto the logo at the top of the letterhead, United States Department of Transportation. I read it once. Then again, I leaned in. Transpiration, not transportation. I blinked, my heart skipping a beat. I held the paper up to the light, wondering if maybe I was hallucinating from stress. But the typo was there, clear as day, one missing T. Something so small, so seemingly insignificant, but on a government document it should not exist. I dropped the page on the table and reached for my laptop. I pulled up the original email, opened the attached PDF, zoomed in. Same typo. I checked earlier files. Nothing. The mistake was new. It hadn't been in the previous rounds of communication. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed someone who could tell me what this meant, or at the very least confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. Rebecca Langley came to mind immediately. We'd gone to MIT together back when I was still bright-eyed about systems engineering, and she was blazing through pre-law like she already had a courtroom waiting. We hadn't spoken in years, not really. Occasional likes on LinkedIn updates, maybe a birthday message once or twice. But she was sharp. She had always been the one in class who spotted inconsistencies before anyone else even knew where to look. I pulled up her contact, hesitated for a second, then dialed. She picked up on the third ring. Michael Rayner. Wow, been a while. I laughed nervously. Yeah, sorry for the ambush. I wouldn't call out of the blue unless it was important. You okay? I paused. Honestly, I don't know. I might have made a huge mistake. Well, that makes two of us. I just signed a lease in New York. Go on. I gave her the short version. An investment deal, my brother, his girlfriend, federal projects, sealed contracts, fake-sounding calls. I told her about the payments, the emails, the video call. I tried to keep my voice steady, but even I could hear the edge in it. I sent her the PDF while we talked. She was silent for a few seconds after opening it. Transpiration, she said quietly. That's not just a typo. That's a red flag waving from the top of a burning building. You're sure, Mike, no one at a federal agency lets that slip? These documents go through 4 levels of review before they ever hit an inbox. Even the interns would catch that. She asked me to forward all the emails I'd received from Jessica and Gerald, especially anything with logos, seals, headers. I sent everything I had. Okay, she said. Give me 24 hours, I'll call in a few favors, do a little digging. Thank you, Bex. Seriously. She paused. Don't do anything else. No more money, no more calls. Sit tight. I agreed and hung up. Then I sat in silence for what felt like an hour, staring at that typo again. That tiny, stupid typo. It was like the thread on a sweater, and I had just started pulling. 3 hours after we hung up, Rebecca called me again. She didn't waste time. I brought someone in, she said. You'll like him. Name's Logan Marsh, fresh out of Berkeley, freelance cyber forensics. Doesn't blink at encrypted headers. He's looking through the metadata now. I blinked. You brought in a hacker, I brought in a professional. Don't worry, he's vetted. You wanted answers. She looped me into a 3-way call with Logan. His voice was young, sharp, impatient in a good way. Hey, Michael. Been skimming through your files. Found a few interesting breadcrumbs. Already? Well, these guys aren't exactly world-class. The headers on Gerald's emails have inconsistencies. First few came from what looks like a spoofed .gov relay, but the last batch was lazy. Registered through a private domain service based in Ohio. Hosting through a mid-tier provider in Dallas. So it's fake. It's better than fake. It's traceable. And your girl Jessica. Her IP from those attachments ties back to an apartment complex in Arlington, Virginia. Yeah, not far from you, huh? I closed my eyes, jaw tight. Logan continued. There's more. That video call you mentioned, I scrubbed the metadata from the recording you forwarded. Charles Grant, your so-called liaison, is not Charles Grant. The guy's a hired actor. Found his demo reel online. Does corporate training videos. He's got an agent in Atlanta. Rebecca jumped in. It gets better. Logan ran the payment account you used for the transfers. It's under a shell company registered in Delaware, but the listed address leads back to a mailbox service in Rockville. One Jessica Hale used to receive packages 3 years ago under a different alias. My hands started to shake. It was all unraveling. The sweater was falling apart in chunks now. Rebecca's voice steadied. We're building a timeline. Logan's putting together a full digital footprint. I'm handling the legal angle. But here's the thing, Michael. You need to stay quiet. No panic, no accusations. If we want to trap them, we need to bait the hook. What kind of bait? Rebecca didn't hesitate. You're going to pretend you have more money. A final investment round. Tell them you're willing to go big. One last wire. But this time we control the route. We track them. We freeze it in motion. I swallowed hard. And what if they run? That's why we move fast. That night we drafted the email. Logan created a burner domain that looked identical to my work address. We wrote the message together, subtle but tempting. Subject: final tier expansion opportunity. Jessica, appreciate the continued updates. Given the projected disbursement timeline and recent call, I've made room to increase my contribution. I have an additional 125K liquid. If there's still space in the final allocation, I'd like to wire by end of week. Let me know how best to proceed. Michael. Logan ran the email through a validation filter, spoofed the headers just enough to keep it believable. Rebecca coached me on the tone, polite, eager, but not desperate. We hit send just before midnight. The response came 12 hours later. Michael: this is excellent news. Gerald and I are thrilled by your continued commitment. Given your Tier 1 standing, we can open a special extension for a final transfer. I'll send over the updated wiring instructions shortly. Warmly, Jessica. I stared at the screen. She didn't even hesitate. Logan called immediately. We're in. She's going to send us a fresh account, probably another shell. I'll track the routing as soon as we get it. You just keep playing along. 2 hours later, the new account details arrived. Rebecca ran the bank info. It was a new LLC registered 5 days ago in New Mexico, listed under a fake address. We handed everything to a federal contact Rebecca had quietly looped in, a white-collar crimes investigator out of the D.C. office. The plan was set. I'd confirm the wire for Friday morning. Logan would monitor the packet trace. Rebecca would coordinate with the feds for a real-time intercept. We'd record everything. That night, I sat alone with the lights off, reading back through months of messages. Every lie, every half-truth, every time I had ignored my gut. I thought of Daniel. How deep was he in? How much did he know? And how far was I willing to go to find out? As I sat at my desk that night, the flickering cursor on my screen matched the jitter in my chest. The trap was set, the pieces were aligning, but there was still one variable that gnawed at the edges of my focus: Mom. Maggie Rayner, 64 years old, soft-spoken but with a spine of steel when it came to Daniel. I knew it wouldn't be enough to just expose the fraud to the authorities. I had to bring the truth home to the one person who still clung to the illusion that Daniel was simply misunderstood. And to do that, I needed more than documents or logic. I needed to crack something far deeper. The next morning, I made the drive to her place in Fredericksburg. She lived in a quaint brick cottage filled with sun catchers and wind chimes, nestled among maple trees she'd planted with our father decades ago. She was already in the yard when I arrived, trimming the edges of her rose beds. Her garden was immaculate, but I could see the weariness in her posture. Michael, she called as I stepped onto the gravel path. You didn't call. Everything okay? I smiled, tight-lipped. Just wanted to talk, in person. She wiped her hands on her apron and led me inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and lavender, her comfort scents. She poured us both tea before settling in across from me at the kitchen table. Her eyes held that familiar, cautious warmth. Is this about Daniel? I nodded. It is, Michael. She sighed. I know you think something's going on, but your brother has been trying so hard. He told me you're stressed, not sleeping. He's worried about you. I took a deep breath, opened my phone, and pulled up the voice recording. I didn't preface it. I just pressed play. Daniel's voice crackled through the speaker. If he doesn't wire the last chunk, just dangle that second contract with the updated seal. Mike won't question it. He's practically programmed to say yes. Then Jessica, relax, I've got this. His mom loves me. She's completely in our corner. Mom sat frozen, her tea untouched. Her face for a moment didn't move, then a twitch in her brow, a tightening around her mouth, the subtle recoil of someone punched without warning. She reached for the phone, paused the audio, her voice trembled. Where did you get this? From Rebecca Langley. Remember her MIT pre-law. She's helping me investigate. This is real, Mom. They used fake documents, fake people, even spoofed government emails. Daniel orchestrated it. Her shoulders sagged and she turned her gaze to the window. Outside, a blue jay landed on the fence, oblivious to the collapse happening within these walls. He said you'd do this, she said quietly. He said you'd try to turn me against him. I leaned forward gently. And I didn't. He did. I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm asking you to see what's right in front of you. She stared at her hands for what felt like hours. Finally, she whispered, I always thought I'd know if one of you was lying. I thought love gave me that power. It doesn't, I said. Not when trust is weaponized. She nodded slowly, her eyes glossed with unshed tears. Then she stood, walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a photo of us, Daniel, me, and Dad at a fishing pier when we were kids. She held it for a moment, her thumb tracing Daniel's face. He was such a sweet boy, she said. He still could have been, I replied, but he made a choice. She set the photo down, turned to me. What do we do now? For the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in the tension in my chest. A shift. Not a victory, but an opening. We do what's right, I said, and we don't let him hurt anyone else. She nodded again, firmer this time. Then she took my hand across the table. You have me now. I'm sorry I didn't before. I squeezed her hand. No anger, just something like relief. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the chimes on the porch, and for the first time in months they didn't sound like noise. They sounded like movement, like something shifting in the right direction. The following week felt like living on a fault line. Every breath, every email notification, every phone call carried the weight of what we were building toward. I met with Rebecca nearly every day, both of us buried in a sea of files, timelines, and cross-referenced evidence. Logan worked behind the scenes, tracking the digital breadcrumbs left behind by Daniel and Jessica. IP addresses, fake domains, burner accounts, manipulated documents, all of it laid out like a crime scene puzzle, and we had every piece. We cataloged everything. Wire transfers, call logs, forged federal emails, the contracts with government seals that were just convincing enough to pass under casual scrutiny. Rebecca drafted a full report, binding it neatly with tabs and annotations. It looked like something you'd hand to a federal prosecutor. By Thursday, I sat across from Special Agent Lisa Chen at the local FBI field office in Richmond. She was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, professional, and didn't waste time with small talk. You understand what filing this means? She asked as she flipped through the pages. I do, and I'm ready. I want them stopped before someone else falls into it. She nodded, tapping the file. This is solid. The recordings, the documents, the fake identities. Your brother and Ms. Hale took it far beyond a family dispute. This is fraud wire fraud impersonation of federal officials. You did the right thing coming to us. A small part of me expected to feel vindicated, but mostly I felt tired. Not from the fight, but from what it meant. There would be no coming back from this. No soft landing for Daniel. No way to tell our story at family gatherings ever again. I left the FBI office just as dusk began to settle over the city. The sky was a deep violet, and I stood on the steps for a minute, letting the cool air remind me I was still tethered to something real. For so long I had tried to save Daniel from himself. Now I was saving others from him. At home, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Dinner next week. Jess has some news. Big opportunity coming up. Let's talk." My stomach twisted. They still thought I was in. Still believed I was on the hook, dangling just long enough to be reeled back in. I typed a response. "Sounds good. Let me know the time." Rebecca was already on the other line when I called. "We're green-lighted," I said. "They want to meet. I'll bait the hook." She exhaled slowly. "We'll have a team nearby. Just keep it natural." "I will." We met again that weekend to go over the sting plan. The FBI would be monitoring the meeting. The moment Jessica or Daniel mentioned anything confirming the scam or hinted at future plans involving false investment opportunities, they'd step in. The goal wasn't just catching them, it was catching them clean without doubt. I tried not to let emotion crowd my thoughts, but that was impossible. Every time I saw Daniel's name pop up on my phone, I thought about the time we built a treehouse together when we were kids. He was afraid of heights, and I held the ladder while he hammered the last board into place. When he made it down, he said, "You always got me, Mike." Now I was the one holding the ladder again. Only this time I was letting him fall. The day before the dinner, I visited Dad's grave. It wasn't a planned stop. I just found myself driving there. The cemetery was quiet, save for a few rustling leaves and the sound of someone mowing in the distance. I stood in front of the headstone, unsure what to say. "You'd be disappointed in both of us," I finally muttered. Or maybe just sad it ended up this way. There were no answers, of course, just the cold stone and the ache of what could have been. When I got back to the car, there was another text from Daniel. "Can you bring your laptop? Jess wants to show you projections." Of course she does. I responded with a thumbs up and let the silence stretch around me. That night I barely slept. I replayed the plan in my head over and over, hoping there were no cracks. Rebecca had been meticulous. Logan had built digital traps in case they tried to delete or move anything mid-meeting. The FBI would be listening in through a small transmitter I'd wear clipped inside my blazer. But still I worried. What if Daniel backed out? What if Jessica got suspicious? Morning came too fast. I ironed my shirt, made coffee I didn't drink, stared into the mirror for longer than necessary. When the time came, I drove to the restaurant in Arlington we'd agreed on. A modern place with glass walls, upscale enough to suggest importance, but casual enough not to raise flags. They were already there when I arrived. Jessica waved bright and confident in a dark red blazer. Daniel smiled like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. "Hey man," Daniel said, hugging me like a brother. "Glad you made it." "Of course," I replied, sitting down and glancing once, just once, at the small van parked across the street. The backup was in place. Jessica opened her laptop. "Wait until you see this," she said, eyes gleaming. And I leaned in, smile calm, heart hammering, ready for the fall. Jessica launched into her pitch with the kind of polish only a practiced liar could maintain. Her slides showed diagrams of a fictional infrastructure upgrade in Houston, complete with logos, progress timelines, and phony signatures. Daniel chimed in with affirmations, nodding along as if he understood the engineering behind it. They had it rehearsed. Every word, every pause. It was a dance they had done before. They wanted another investment, $96,000 wired in 2 installments. A new phase, a limited time window, and an exclusive opportunity I was lucky to access. I leaned forward, scribbling notes like I cared, asking just enough questions to seem cautious, but not so many that I might arouse suspicion. "That sounds like a strong position," I said, circling meaningless numbers on the printout. You're sure the project is federal-backed? Jessica gave her patented confident smile. Absolutely. Department of Transportation greenlighted it just last month. You'll be locked in before public rollout, Daniel added. This is the one, Mike. This is the final push. We get in now, we're set. I nodded slowly, like I was almost convinced, like the math was computing. Let me think on it. But yeah, I'm leaning toward yes. Jessica reached across the table and touched my wrist. I'd get everything ready, contract signing, documentation. We'll do it right this time. No delays, in and out. Where I asked. Austin, the Westmore Grand, Friday, noon. Perfect, I said. They left the restaurant like winners. I stayed behind pretending to finish my drink. Across the street, the van that had been idle began to pull away. I pulled out my phone and typed one word into the encrypted app Rebecca had set up. Confirmed. The next few days moved like they were part of someone else's life. Rebecca worked with the FBI team to wire the room at the Westmore. Surveillance cameras were embedded in the smoke detectors. The pen I would carry contained a live mic. A backup team would be staged in the hallway with probable cause warrants pre-signed and ready to go. At night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running over my lines, checking the transfer confirmations, rehearsing the timing. I wasn't scared for my safety. I was scared that somehow they'd sniff out the trap, that Daniel would see something in my eyes he hadn't seen before, that Jessica would notice the tremor in my hand and call the whole thing off. But when Friday came, I was stone. I arrived at the hotel 30 minutes early. The lobby smelled like bergamot and wealth. Marble floors, polished brass staff in pristine uniforms. I checked in at the front desk under a name provided by the FBI and was escorted to a private conference suite on the 13th floor. The room was warm, sleek, full of soft lighting and expensive slants. I took my seat at the long glass table and set the contract folder beside me. The pen camera clipped to my lapel faced forward. I breathed deep and tried not to look at the mirrored wall behind me, knowing it was two-way. At noon sharp they arrived. Jessica first in a cream blouse and tailored pantsuit. She carried a leather briefcase and wore confidence like perfume. Daniel followed a step behind, more anxious than usual, but still trying to play it cool. "You ready for this?" he asked, pulling me into a quick hug. "Absolutely," I said. Jessica opened her briefcase and laid out the contract. She talked through the details like she had done 100 times, pointing to payment terms, projected ROI, and exit clauses designed to look legitimate. Every word was bait, and I was nodding like a fish drawn to the hook. When she passed the papers to me, I flipped them slowly, glancing at the fake government stamp, the forged watermark. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. "Sending the first half now," I said. Daniel exhaled, relieved. "You're doing the right thing, Mike. We're almost there." Jessica leaned in. "As soon as that clears, I'll send the access credentials." I pressed a few buttons, then looked up. All done. From the corner of my eye, I saw the hallway door open. Quiet at first, then louder as footsteps filled the space. Jessica's face changed instantly, confusion, then panic. Daniel turned around too late. Federal agents entered in swift motion. One of them read the Miranda rights as another secured Daniel's wrists. Jessica tried to stand, but two officers flanked her. "What is this?" she snapped. "This is a mistake." Michael Daniel's voice cracked, full of disbelief. "What the hell is this?" I didn't answer. Rebecca stepped in, clipboard in hand, confirming evidence on site. One of the agents turned to me, nodded once. "You did good." I stood in silence while the room emptied. Jessica and Daniel were led out, cuffed expressions twisted between fury and betrayal. For once, they were caught not just in the act, but in the truth of who they were. As the door clicked shut, I let my shoulders fall. The silence now was different. Not empty, not waiting, but clean, and for the first time I didn't feel like the fool. I watched as two agents gently but firmly guided Daniel toward the exit, his shoulders hunched with confusion and betrayal. Jessica's panic had escalated from disbelief when the first officer entered the room to full-blown hysteria now, as she realized there was no graceful escape this time. Even from a distance, I could see her eyes darting, searching for a way out, for a familiar face that might save her. There was none. Outside in the hotel's valet area, the chase unfolded in fragments of movement. Daniel broke free from the agents just for a second. He ran, panic propelling him forward. His coat flared behind him like dark wings in flight. He clattered across the polished stone terrace straight toward the mirrored glass wall. Cameras from every angle captured it. The desperation in his steps, the fear in his eyes, the way the afternoon light fractured across his face. I stayed inside, anchored to the spot. Across the glass, I saw the valet driver standing, frozen, mouth open. Tourists emerged from the lobby, their phones already recording, thinking this was some kind of street performance. Daniel slammed into a car door, ears ringing, realization dawning too late. Two officers caught up and pinned him against the vehicle. Handcuffs clicked shut. Jessica stumbled outside, voice choked. "Michael, help him!" I didn't move. I couldn't. My breath caught. The world narrowed to the cold metal of the door, the echo of Daniel's heaving breaths, the sneer of betrayal in Jessica's eyes, even now turned toward me. Journalists and passers-by surrounded the scene. Flashes popped from cameras as reporters shouted questions. "Is this about the federal contract scam? Is Mr. Rainer involved?" Daniel raised his head, turning toward the crowd. A bruise bloomed over his eyebrow. He stared at me through the glass. FBI agents pulled Jessica away gently but firmly. She struggled, voice cracking, yelling about betrayal, trust, love. The cameras caught every second, broadcast moments later on news channels across Texas. I recognized the setup because Rebecca had told me to expect it. They needed the world to see him being arrested. That would prevent anyone from trying to hide it later. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching both of them disappear into the black SUVs that had arrived. The crowd parted like water. The doors thudded shut. Sirens grew distant. The reflective lobby windows swallowed them whole and returned only my reflection. I stood there long after the room was empty. The scent of fancy upholstery and the hum of recessed lighting felt unfamiliar. There was no relief coursing through me, just a long empty echo that vibrated against my ribcage. Finally, I turned, walking to the table where the contract lay forgotten. The fringed edges of the paper had caught on the corner when the turbulence began. I ran my finger across the seal, now faded in my memory to a symbol of deception. I wanted to believe this would be the end. That somehow driving the final nail had freed me. Freed us. Then before I could retreat, a soft knock came at the door. Rebecca entered, her expression a mask of professional restraint. "You did it," she said quietly. I nodded, tracing a line in the glass tabletop. "He fell for it," I whispered. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with steel. It took 8 months from the day of their arrest to the day the sentences were read. 8 long, dragging months of hearings, statements, delays, and a parade of paperwork that felt endless. But I sat through it all. I watched the footage from the sting operation played back in a silent courtroom. I listened as attorneys laid out the trail of evidence. I stood when the judge asked me to confirm my identity and deliver my statement. And I stayed when the verdict came down. Daniel Rainer, 7 years in federal prison with no chance of parole before 5. Jessica Hale, 5 years minimum security plus restitution. There was no cheering inside me, no final release of breath. Just a dull kind of ache, like the closing of a door I never wanted to walk through in the first place. Mom didn't come to the sentencing. She couldn't. After the recordings came to light, after she sat in her living room replaying her youngest son's voice, admitting, joking even about how easy I had been to manipulate something broke in her. We stopped talking for a few weeks. Then she called one night, her voice so small I barely recognized it. "I'm sorry, Michael. I believed the wrong son." It was the closest thing to peace we would get. She stopped answering Daniel's calls, refused to visit him. She sent back a letter he wrote from jail without opening it. I never asked what was inside. Work at Lennox Engineering slowly normalized. HR issued a statement clearing me of any wrongdoing. The board quietly apologized. I was offered my old position back with back pay and a bonus as a gesture of goodwill. I accepted, but going into that building again felt like returning to the scene of a fire. Everything looked fine on the surface, but I could still smell the smoke. Rebecca kept in touch. She checked on me weekly, usually under the guise of legal updates. Logan disappeared into another project, some cybersecurity work in New York. I never heard from him again. Maybe that was for the best. What lingered was the silence in my apartment. The space Jessica had once entered with confident heels and fake smiles now felt sterile. I threw away every object she might have touched. Cleaned the place until the scent of bleach clung to my clothes. But it wasn't enough. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Margot Ellis. At first, I just sat there. I didn't know how to explain betrayal by your own blood, how to confess that sometimes I still wanted to call Daniel and ask why, how I hated myself for not hating him enough. Dr. Ellis gave me a journal, told me to write. At first, it was mechanical, bullet points, fragments. But then it turned into something else. Pages grew into scenes, scenes became chapters. And one morning I realized I wasn't writing just to process. I was writing so others could see it, so someone else might stop short of the cliff before the fall. That manuscript sits now in a folder on my laptop. 68,000 words and counting. Not all of it is pretty. None of it is exaggerated, but every single word is true. I don't know what I'll do with it yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But for the first time since this began, I feel like I'm holding the pen again. And that, oddly enough, is enough for now. I never thought revenge would feel so quiet. There was no grand celebration, no moment of fireworks or applause. Just the stillness after the storm, the way the air feels charged but calm. That's how it felt walking out of the courthouse, knowing Daniel and Jessica were behind bars and I had done everything within the law to put them there. I sat on the steps outside the federal building watching the late afternoon sun dip behind the skyline of downtown Austin. Cars passed. People laughed into their phones. The world had kept turning while mine fell apart, then slowly stitched itself back together. I think that's the part no one warns you about. Justice doesn't stop the ache. It just makes space for it to heal. In the weeks that followed, I got used to being alone again. No texts from Daniel, no calls from Jessica, no meetings with lawyers or late-night planning sessions with Rebecca. Life became ordinary in a way that felt foreign. One night I opened the file again. The manuscript. It had become my shadow sitting in that folder labeled simply the truth. I read the first chapter aloud. My own voice trembled not from fear but from clarity, from ownership, and I knew then it wasn't just for me anymore. So I printed 5 copies, sent one to Dr. Ellis, one to Rebecca, one to the DOJ agent who had handled my case, one I left on my mother's porch with a note, "No more lies. Only this." And the last I mailed anonymously to a support group in Chicago for scam victims I had found online but never joined. Maybe someone else would recognize the signs. Maybe they wouldn't fall for the perfect plan. I didn't hear back from anyone. I didn't expect to. That wasn't the point. One morning I walked past the same coffee shop where I had first told Daniel I'd invest. It was still there. Same blue awning, same chalkboard menu. I stopped in front of the door, hand on the handle, then let it fall. It wasn't guilt or shame. It was acceptance. I didn't need to walk back through that chapter to know how it ended. My therapist asked me once if I thought Daniel ever really loved me. I told her I wasn't sure that mattered anymore. Love doesn't excuse cruelty, and trust once fractured isn't easily repaired. But here's what I do know. They thought I was weak, that I was naive, that I wouldn't fight back. They counted on my loyalty, on the years of history, on the blood tie that used to mean everything. But they underestimated the man who had spent a lifetime solving structural failures. I saw the cracks, and when the time was right, I brought the whole damn thing down. My brother and his mistress scammed me with a perfect plan, but they never expected what I'd do next. And you? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? Tell me your story. Maybe together we'll write the next chapter.